A convicted Baltimore serial killer is found dead inside his prison cell. Joe Metheny, shown here in a white t-shirt, was found dead in his Western Correctional Institution cell. Metheny was serving 2 life sentences without parole for kidnapping, sex assault, and 2 counts of murder. His death is under investigation.
In the shadows of urban decay and family despair, a young man's heart turns cold. This is not just a story of crime, it's a journey into the darkest corridors of a troubled soul. Welcome to the chilling saga of Joseph Roth Bethany, whose early scars led him down a path few dare to tread. But what turns a troubled youth into a remorseless criminal? Is it nature, nurture, or a moment of despair that can't be taken back? Join us as we unravel the transformation of an ordinary child into a notorious felon, right here on our deep dive into the abyss of human nature. Born into the gritty streets of Baltimore in 1955, Joseph Roth Bethany entered a world where adversity was the norm and survival a daily battle. The youngest of 7 children, Joseph's life was marked by chaos from the start. His father, a hard-drinking man with a temper as volatile as the jobs he drifted between, left an indelible mark on the family before dying in a car crash fueled by alcohol when Joseph was only 6. His death plunged the family deeper into turmoil, leaving Joseph's mother to fend for herself and her children in a city that showed little mercy to the downtrodden. Jean Bethany, Joseph's mother, was a woman of iron while trapped in a relentless cycle of low-wage jobs from waitressing at dingy diners to scrubbing floors late into the night. Her life was a constant juggle, attempting to provide for her children on meager earnings while battling the ever-present shadow of poverty and despair. The children, often left to their own devices, grew up in a world where affection was scarce and the harsh realities of life were all too familiar. In this environment, Joseph's childhood was a patchwork of neglect and fleeting moments of joy. School was a secondary concern, survival was the curriculum they mastered. Despite his mother's Herculean efforts, the absence of a stable paternal figure and the constant presence of hardship began to shape Joseph's outlook on life. He learned early that the world was not a forgiving place, that it was eat or be eaten, and that sentiment simmered within him as he grew. As Joseph transitioned into adolescence, the streets of Baltimore offered him the education his schools could not. He learned the language of the streets, made connections with figures of questionable repute, and started to see crime not as a choice, but as a necessary step towards survival and asserting control in a world that had denied him both. The seeds of resentment and anger planted in his turbulent youth found fertile ground in a community rife with violence and desperation. This formative period was crucial in molding Joseph's future path. With each passing year, the line between right and wrong blurred, as did his aspirations for a normal life. The early loss of his father, coupled with his mother's struggles, not only deprived him of childhood innocence, but hardened him against a society he believed had abandoned him. As we delve deeper into Joseph's story, we see how a confluence of early adversity and environmental influences steered him towards a dark and irreversible path. At the age of 18, seeking an escape from the suffocating streets of Baltimore and perhaps a shot at redemption, Joseph Roth Bethany enlisted in the army. But rather than finding a structured path to a better life, the military became the arena where Joseph was introduced to his most destructive adversary yet, drugs. The disciplined military environment paradoxically exposed him to narcotics as he mingled with fellow soldiers similarly struggling with their pasts and seeking solace in substances. The army, for all its regiment and order, proved to be no sanctuary for Joseph. Instead, it was here that he learned to numb his emotional scars with chemicals, a habit that only deepened the rift between his ideal self and the person he was becoming. His stint overseas, marked by the harsh realities of military life and the horrors he witnessed, only served to further desensitize him to violence and human suffering. Upon his return to civilian life, Joseph found himself fundamentally altered. The discipline of military life was replaced by the chaos of his inner turmoil, now compounded by addiction. Baltimore welcomed him back not with open arms, but with the same bleak prospects he had left behind. Jobs were scarce, especially for a veteran with a growing dependence on drugs and a rapidly deteriorating mental state. The skills he had acquired in the army discipline, strategic thinking, and a certain desensitization to violence were misapplied as he ventured deeper into criminal activities. Initially petty crimes to support his addiction spiraled into more organized criminal endeavors. Joseph's military training gave him a unique edge in this dark world, making him both respected and feared in the underground networks of Baltimore. The transition from military precision to chaotic criminal endeavors marked a significant chapter in Joseph's life. His ability to plan, execute, and evade detection was honed not just in the alleys and back streets of his hometown, but also in the structured environment of the army. Every step deeper into his life of crime was, in a twisted way, a step taken with military efficiency. This period of Joseph's life underscores a tragic irony. The very institution meant to instill discipline and provide a sense of purpose instead pushed him further towards the edge. It's a poignant reminder of how fragile the line between right and wrong can be, especially when one's moral compass is recalibrated by the rigors of war and the allure of escape through substance abuse. The trajectory of Joseph Roth Bettany's life reached a harrowing turning point in the summer of 1994 when he faced an unimaginable personal crisis. His wife and young child, the only remaining beacons of hope in his tumultuous life, vanished without a trace. The sudden disappearance left Joseph grappling with a torrent of despair and betrayal, emotions that would soon fuel a dangerous escalation in his behavior. Before this critical juncture, Joseph's criminal activities, though serious, had primarily revolved around survival and substance abuse. However, the disappearance of his family shattered any remaining veneer of restraint he possessed. Consumed by a mix of fury and heartbreak, he found himself unable to cope with the overwhelming sense of loss and abandonment. The police offered little in the way of answers, their indifference only deepening his resentment and mistrust towards a system he felt had failed him repeatedly. As weeks turned into months with no word of his family's whereabouts, Joseph's grief transformed into a raw, unbridled rage. He began to channel his pain into increasingly violent acts, believing that he had nothing left to lose. His crimes grew more heinous and calculated, marked by a cold-blooded detachment that was both a product of his military background and his profound personal anguish. This period marked a dark evolution in Joseph's life, as he transitioned from a man battling personal demons and addiction to a figure consumed by vengeance and anger. The loss of his family didn't just break him, it unleashed a version of Joseph that was ruthless and devoid of empathy, propelling him further down a path from which there would be no return. The disappearance of his wife and child was not just a turning point, but a catalyst that transformed personal pain into public terror. In the wake of his family's disappearance, Joseph Roth Bettany's descent into darkness accelerated at a terrifying pace. The floodgates of his restraint were blown open, unleashing a series of brutal crimes that would stun the community and confound law enforcement. Joseph's actions became increasingly violent, his methods more ruthless, and his disregard for human life chillingly apparent. This spiral into violence began with targeted aggression towards those he perceived as threats or enemies. Joseph utilized his military training to execute meticulously planned attacks, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. The brutality of these acts was not just a reflection of his inner turmoil, but also an outward expression of his deep-seated rage and desire for control. Each crime was more vicious than the last, as if he were trying to exorcise his demons through the infliction of pain on others. The nature of Joseph's attacks varied from severe beatings to cold-blooded murder, with his victims chosen not at random, but with a calculated intent that betrayed a deeply disturbed mind. He seemed to derive a perverse sense of satisfaction from his actions, viewing each assault as a step towards reclaiming the power he felt he had lost with the disappearance of his family. As Joseph's spiral continued, the community lived in fear, unsure of where or when he would strike next. His descent was not just a personal tragedy, but a public menace. Reflecting on this phase of his life, it becomes evident that his violence was a distorted coping mechanism, an attempt to manage his grief and loss through domination and terror. The escalation of his criminal behavior was a testament to how profoundly his unresolved anger and despair had consumed him, transforming him into a figure synonymous with fear. As Joseph Roth Bethany's reign of terror escalated, law enforcement intensified their efforts to bring him to justice. The breakthrough came when a combination of forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and surveillance technology converged to pinpoint Joseph as the prime suspect in multiple violent crimes. His capture was not the result of a dramatic standoff or a violent confrontation, but a meticulous police operation that cornered him during a routine activity, underscoring the often unspectacular reality of law enforcement work. The trial that followed was a media circus, drawing attention not only for the heinous nature of the crimes, but also for the tragic figure of Joseph himself, a man who had descended into darkness before the public's eyes. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leading to multiple convictions. Joseph was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that brought a somber sense of relief to the community he had terrorized. The impact of Joseph's actions on the community was profound. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, while the fear he had instilled took longer to dissipate. The case prompted a reassessment of how such individuals could be identified and intercepted earlier in their criminal careers, sparking debates on mental health, substance abuse, and societal safety nets. Ultimately, Joseph's capture and the subsequent trial served as a grim reminder of the potential human cost of neglecting the marginalized and troubled individuals within society. The harrowing tale of Joseph Roth Bethany serves as a stark lesson in the complexities of human nature and the devastating impact of unchecked trauma and anger. His story compels us to consider how early intervention and more robust support systems might alter the trajectory of those teetering on the edge of societal norms. It is a reminder that behind every headline of crime and violence lies a deeper story of pain and desperation. As we reflect on Joseph's life, let us also ponder the broader implications of his actions on society and the criminal justice system. How can we better understand and mitigate the factors that propel individuals like Joseph towards such dark paths? And more importantly, how do we balance justice and redemption in a world that often seems devoid of both? Let this story be a call to action, not only to remember the victims, but also to proactively engage with those who are struggling. Let us strive to build a society where such tragedies are the exception, not the inevitability.